Well, they say rust never sleeps, and it looks the same for cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis, which has been confirmed on another Ashburton farm earlier this month. This brings the total number of infected properties nationwide to 17, 10 in South Canterbury, 5 in Southland, 1 in Ashburton, and another one in the Hawke's Bay. Now, MPI's Director of Response, David Yard, joins us to give us an update on where things are at with M Bovis. Good morning. Welcome, David. So, pretty much the horse is bolted now insofar as containing M Bovis. Is it a case of now managing the disease?
Look, no, I'd like to disagree with your statement that the horse has bolted. Yep. Clearly, we've got a larger number of cases of M Bovis.
Yes.
The number is going up, and we expect the number to go up more significantly. But I don't think that the horse has bolted or the disease is getting away from us. I think it's more indicative that we are doing intensive research and investigation, and that we're actually finding farms that have been positive for a few months. The disease itself appears to be largely attributable just to movement of infected animals. So the main focus of our work has been to identify infected properties and then find out where animals from that farm has come. This is quite an extensive and difficult process, but we're well on top of it, and we believe that eradication is still quite feasible.
This is where my question's coming from. How did it spread from these farms? There's a lockdown situation where movement was meant to be restricted, and a lot, are saying through milk or young calves, animals being, bobby calves being transferred. Is that more than likely the situation?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the disease is spread through either the transfer of infected milk to feed calves or through the movement of infected animals. But once we discover a property is infected, in essence, we put it in lockdown. We serve a legal notice. So as soon as we become aware that a property is infected, there will be no more risk of infection from that property. So what we're dealing with is retrospective movements of the disease before we became aware of it. And that's where all our efforts have been in terms of extensive tracing to identify how far the disease has gone.
Okay, but with this lockdown, is it not true that that has not been adhered to in some cases? And as we've heard, some of these farmers have had very, very poor records as far as their NATE concerned.
Yeah, no, look, the farms, once the notice is has been served, I can assure you, are in absolute lockdown. There are very heavy penalties for failure to comply. They have oversight of a restricted place manager, and I can assure your listeners that no infected animals have moved off that property after we become aware of it. The difficulty with failure of farms to keep tracing records, and that indeed has been a problem, is that it should be quite a simple process for us to go back to a farmer and say, who have you sold animals to in the last 6, 9 months or even a year? But because the records have not been kept, it means that they're going to have to go back on their memory in many cases, which makes it extremely difficult for us to immediately contact people who receive animals and to do what we call forward traces.
So therefore, would you not say that it's time to call for outing these farmers publicly then? Because if they fail on their memories, the transport or the stock agent or someone will have a memory that very clearly, would they not? That, oh dear, that's an infected farm. I should have some concern if I knew who they were.
Yeah, look, I do appreciate the farming community's concern about MPI's decision not to name these things, but this overlaps with the Privacy Act, and we asked to somehow got our hands tied about what we can and can't release. But what I would say is to farmers in that area, if they have concern, not only is the infected properties on lockdown, but they have quite large notices on their entrance to say that this is a restricted place and people cannot enter.
David, a question from a sheep and beef farmer just up the road from the initial outbreak. He wants to know why the communication has not been better throughout the district, because they're worried as hell. You can imagine if a farmer has beef cattle out on the hill, it's harder to detect these problems. I take it all the dairy farmers, their cattle are in close proximity to each other all the time. But if it gets an outbreak in the beef sector, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah, well, we are working with beef and lamb. We are testing routinely animals at slaughter to identify the disease, and we have picked up some from swabbing at the slaughterhouse. We are working with beef and lamb. We're working with Dairy New Zealand, with federated farmers. And MPI is mounting a quite extensive media campaign. So, the fact that your radio station is onto this, as with many others, the word is out there about the disease. There is plenty of information on our website for farmers to go to. And if farmers have concern that they're demonstrating symptoms, their vets should contact us, or the farmers can, and we have dedicated numbers for them to phone in. So we are practically doing all that we can do to remain engaged with the farming. That's both dairy and the beef communities.
Is the culling of the stock on affected farms still continuing, or has this been stopped now due to the new fines?
Okay, look, the culling has been temporarily halted. As you'll be aware, MPI is just working with industry, and from the 1st of February we will be initiating a national milk survey where samples of milk will be taken from every dairy farm across the country, and farmers are being urged to submit 2 mastitic milk samples as well, because they're the ones that are likely to give an indication.
What happens if someone is like those swabs you mentioned, or the reject milk, the mastitis milk they've tested? If that tests positive, what is the action? You get a positive test today. Tell us what happens to that farm. Okay,
that's quite simple. As soon as a sample becomes positive, the farmer or and the owner, if they're indeed separate people, in the case of share milkers, will be contacted. They will immediately be served with what we call a restricted place notice, which puts them in lockdown or quarantine, which prevents them from moving animals or high-risk good materials on or off. We will contact the receiving dairy, because they need to take precautions when they pick up milk to make sure that the tankers don't spread. We employ a restricted place manager to help the farmer through this difficult time. And we also put them in touch with the Rural Support Trust to give psychosocial support to the farmers.
As far as the neighbours are concerned, David, who notifies them, or do they have to drive past the gate and see the yellow sign?
Well, the neighbours themselves, if they are what we call a contiguous property, so they're directly adjacent to the farm, they will be contacted and we will take samples from them, because there is a slighter risk that the disease could have passed over the fence.
As far as movement of stock, unspecified movement, Nate, for example, can you tell us what the consequence is if someone hasn't kept appropriate Nate records?
No, sorry. Look, Nate enforcement is not within the scope of the response. So I think it's well publicised that there are potential financial.
Yeah. What about in your situation? If a farm has been on lockdown and someone moves stock that they are not prohibited to do.
That's a different situation. Nate is all to do with record keeping. The restricted place notices that these properties go under, as I said, they're managed by a restricted place manager. There are some very heavy fines and punitive actions to be taken.
An example?
If farmers choose to ignore it. Look, I'm not prepared to discuss it. It's built into statute. The people who are under restricted place notices will be made aware of that. But we have not had one case of any farmer, once they've been on restricted place notices, of breaching those rules. So, people are taking it very seriously once they are affected. What I'm saying is that in terms of movement and traceability, other farmers could step in now to make sure they're ready should they reach that unfortunate position.
Radio Live Rural Exchange.